Uh, Thank you everyone for joining us and welcome to the February 9th Independent Taxpayers Oversight Committee for Sandag. As always, I want to thank all of our staff, Sandag staff, that have helped put this meeting together. And thank you everyone for being here on the phone or via Zoom. We appreciate it. So it looks like we do have a quorum and we can get started. But before we dive into the agenda, let's have our interpreter, Carlos Diaz, walk us through the interpretation process. Go ahead, Carlos.
Thank you, Chair House. I will begin with the instructions in Spanish and I will come back with the instructions in English. Muy buenos días y bienvenidos, bienvenidas a esta sesión del Comité Independiente de Vigilancia por Contribuyentes. Se está ofreciendo el servicio de interpretación simultánea. Para hacer uso del mismo, por favor desplácese a la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, en celular, tableta, etc., presione primero los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Por último, si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Once again, interpretation is being provided to and from Spanish. To take advantage of the feature, please scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom screen where the meeting controls are, then click on the interpretation icon. It looks like a little world, and then select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, or other mobile device, first press the ellipsis, the three dots, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on Mute Original Audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Gracias, and thank you, Chair House.
Thank you, Carlos. Okay, now I'm going to ask our committee liaison to go through and talk about how you can participate and engage in the comment process. Go ahead, Ariana.
Thank you, Chair House. So the members will be using their cameras. We will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and then Chair House will recognize you. As noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, in addition to emailing comments, the public may also provide live comments during today's meeting. And in order to do so, you can join today's Zoom meeting through the link or by dialing one of the numbers from your phone that are provided on the cover page of today's meeting agenda. Join the meeting by clicking on the Join Webinar link provided in the confirmation email that you'll receive upon registering. And when public comments are called for on an item on the Zoom platform, click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar on the top right-hand corner of your screen. The chair will call on you by the name you provided, but if you are participating by telephone, please press *9 and the chair will call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. The instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of Sandag's website at www.sandag.org. And all comments, whether emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. Thank you, Chair House.
Thank you, Ariana. Okay, our first item on the agenda is public comments. Clerk, could you please verify if we have any public comments?
No, Chair House, we do not have any public comments.
Very good. Okay, then we will dive right into our second item on the agenda, which is Chief Executive Officer report. Do we have Hassan, or are you Ray? Are you substituting?
Good morning, Chair House. I am substituting. I am filling in for Hassan for this report.
Well, I want to first congratulate you on your new position to Deputy CEO, and we wish you the best.
Well, thank you very much. And I suppose part of my duties is going to be filling in for Hassan when I have to do a CEO report. So here I am.
Well deserved. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I know you have a lot on your agenda, so I'm going to try to be brief. But as you mentioned, we just went through a reorganization. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but we've had an unprecedented year of accomplishments. We've opened the Mid-Coast Corridor. We've passed the 2021 regional plan, and we've made tremendous progress on Otay Mesa East, the third border crossing, which is extremely important for this region. The Del Mar Bluff stabilization, Central Mobility Hub, those are 3 of the big projects we're working on. And it's important that Sandag continue to evolve and to be able to pivot to adapt to these type of needs and priorities. And following the departure of some of the Sandag leadership team over the past couple of months, Hassan's had an opportunity to really identify a new structure that's going to position us well to do this in the future. And as part of the reorganization, Colleen Clemenson and I will be serving as deputy CEOs, really focusing on shifting Sandag to a matrix-based organization and to streamline the workflow so that we can really align and collaborate better across the agency. And just in terms of the distribution of duties, a lot of the outwardly facing things that you see will be handled by Colleen. So things like the planning and the interaction with the CBOs and the engineering side of the house, the building the projects, the communication. So she will kind of be outwardly facing, and I will be doing much more of the internal work. I will be the operational work. So I'll be working at fixing working on improving the processes, for instance, that Sandag runs by. So everything from HR to facilities to IT to the way that we process our data and push it out to the communities. Speaking of of funding, for instance, we were awarded a $405,000 grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation to start to plan the transit-oriented development along the Blue Line trolley. So that was one of the grants that we received recently. And we're going to use this funding to better connect our communities to transit and to affordable housing along the Blue Line. This is also a perfect opportunity to continue to build off of our major TransNet investment on the Mid-Coast Corridor extension and ensure that we move the needle forward in terms of making transit more convenient for everybody. In the past couple of weeks, we broke ground on the Pershing Bikeway, which is another important TransNet project. And coming up very soon, the 4th and 5th Avenue Bikeways, Georgia and Meade Bikeway, and the Landis Bikeway projects will also be fully open. Next week, we will be hosting key officials to mark the ongoing progress with the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry. That is moving very quickly. We've had some agreements with the Mexican side of the equation, and they've purchased, for instance, the land that's required for the border crossing to happen. So that's a really fantastic movement forward on that project. And lastly, the partnership with Caltrans and San Dieguito River Project. We moved forward on phase 2 of the San Dieguito Lagoon wetland restoration last month. In the next week, we're going to open 9 miles of HOV lanes in both directions on the I-5 and North County corridor, the coastal corridor. And we are really hitting the ground running in 2022 and hope that you can join us as we celebrate these achievements through the year. And that concludes the Executive Director's report.
Thank you very much, Ray. Always wonderful to hear all the progress. So, are there any public comments?
No, Chair House, no public comments.
Okay, how about our members, our Italk members? Are there any comments? Please raise your hand if there are. I don't see any, so we will move on. Thanks again, Ray.
Thank you.
Let's move on to our consent agenda item. And we have one approval of the meeting minutes, as well as 3 other items on the consent agenda. Just want to know if any members would like to pull any of the consent agenda items for discussion. If not, I see Pedro's, Mr. Orso, go ahead.
I just have a question on item number 4.
Yes. Do we want to pull that out so you can discuss it, and then we will approve the rest of the consent items then?
Up to you. If you want, we can do that, or I can ask the question.
Okay, if there's a quick one, let's go ahead and get that done.
My question is on item number 4, this is a per unit fee, right? When the developer pulls a permit with the cities and the county.
Correct. It's a per residential fee, unit fee.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Yeah.
Perfect. And that was quick. So
Thank you.
if I may, let's see, I have Stuart's hand up as well. Go ahead, Stuart.
I read through the memo and I was just wondering perhaps if Ray is still on or if somebody else could just speak to the 2% increase, just to help us understand that a little bit better. It seems a little, kind of contrary to what we all hear and read about. And in fact, the memo went into some detail about the impacts of inflation. And so I'm just wondering about the 2% versus something that seems a little bit more aligned with actual inflation. So if you can help us reconcile that, I appreciate it.
So we have Jim Miller. Jim Miller's on the call as well. He can help walk through that.
Sure. Yeah. The key here, Stuart, is that we look at this in a long-term process, and the RTCIP fee by ordinance has to go up 2% per year, and there are certain years when construction cost inflation is less than 2%, and years such as last year when it's well over 2%. But in the previous couple of years before last year, it was below 2%. So last year we saw a jump in the construction cost index of about 6.5%. But that really just got us back up to where we should be with the annual 2% increase that we look at. So we're really trying over the really long term to keep the buying power of this fee up to where it should be based on the construction cost index. And because we were a little bit ahead of the construction cost index over the last couple of years, last year's large rise in the construction cost index really only got us back to where we were with 2%. Now, next year, I'm expecting, as many are, that we're going to see inflation in construction costs a little higher than 2%, perhaps substantially higher than 2%. And at that point, we'll have to raise the fee higher than the customary 2%. But we've, over the long term of this ordinance, been pretty lucky in that 2% has really been about the average of the construction cost index. I think there's only 1 year we've had to raise it more than that. But next year could be the next year that we have to do that. But overall, we've really kept good track of construction costs over the long term.
I guess my question boils down to, and I think you alluded to this, Jim, that you're in effect saying that you adjust this in a little bit of a backward look as opposed to a forward look, because it strikes me that if one, as you mentioned, if one were expecting construction costs to be higher than the 2% in the next year or so, that you might actually raise it higher than the 2% in anticipation, but you're describing it's a little bit more of a backward look approach. Is that right?
That's precisely right. Yeah, we do tend to look backwards because we don't want to base it on forecasts of inflation, which could be wildly wrong. We want to make sure that over the long haul, it is kept pace with inflation, and looking backwards allows us to do that with some certainty.
Okay, if there are no other comments or questions, if I could ask for a motion to approve the consent items, including our meeting minutes. Would anyone care to make a motion? Jonathan.
Mr. Chair, I also like to make a motion. We approve the consent agenda.
Thank you very much. And do I have a second?
I will second that.
Stuart is seconding. He beat you to it, Pedro.
That's okay. Thank you.
Okay, so Clerk, if I could ask for a vote, please.
Yes. CEO Private Sector Chair Sunny House.
Approved.
Finance Budgeting Vice Chair Stuart Halpern.
Approve.
Real Estate Right-of-Way Jonathan Frankel.
Approve.
Biology Environmental Dustin Fuller.
Approve.
Licensed Engineer is absent. Licensed Civil Engineer, Traffic Engineer, Michael Kinney.
Approve.
Contractor Construction, Pedro Orso Delgado.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
Thank you, Clerk. Okay, we're now on item number 7, doing well on time. Ariana, please go ahead and tell us about the actions of the Transportation Committee and the board.
Thank you, Chair House. Happy to do so. Yes. So since your meeting on January 12th, the board adopted a couple of items that you've reviewed at your recent meetings, including the 2022 performance management safety targets, and then also the environmental mitigation program land management grant amendment requests. And then the board also had an opportunity to review the Sandag Equity Action Plan, which provided an update on work to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion within the organization. And that's it for
Very
today.
good. Okay, I don't see any comments or questions, so we will move on to item number 8, which is City of San Diego TransNet Program, Transportation Capital Improvement Update. I want to thank the city staff for being here and giving us this update. So please go ahead. I don't know who will start.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you, committee. I'm Gene Matter, Assistant Director for the City of San Diego's Transportation Department. And with me today is Ben Battaglia, the department's Deputy Director for Finance. Also with us today is Myrna Dayton, Assistant Director for the city's Engineering and Capital Projects Department and Chief Deputy City Engineer. We're here to provide the city's TransNet update and highlight how the funds are being utilized throughout the city. Ben is going to start by providing an update on the fund balance, a look at the city's transportation portion of the CIP program, and how the city is leveraging its funding to provide transportation-related services. I will then wrap up our presentation with information about some of the larger projects of interest. So I will turn it over to Ben for that first portion of our presentation.
Thank you, Gene. And it looks like somebody else is sharing the PowerPoint presentation. Would you mind if I shared it so I could run through it? Okay, great. Thank you. Let me share my screen here. Okay, and can everybody see my screen?
Yes, Ben.
Okay, perfect. So the city of San Diego receives over 40% of total TransNet local streets and roads revenue. With the implementation of cash management strategies, the city has made significant progress spending TransNet cash on priority projects over the last 6 years. This table is a snapshot of the current fiscal year's projection, as well as the prior 6 fiscal years' activity. Since fiscal year 2016, the city has decreased its balance at Sandag by approximately $28 million, which equates to about 50% reduction. Fund balance is expected to increase slightly by the end of fiscal year 22, and this is primarily due to a significant increase in revenue projections for the current fiscal year, as well as impacts from COVID. We do anticipate that fund balance will decrease by the end of fiscal year 2023 due to a number of projects entering construction within the next year. And this chart shows the different funding sources that supports the department's fiscal year 2022 CIP program. TransNet is shown in the blue slice, and it makes up about $48 million or 12% of our entire program. Our program is approximately $450 million. TransNet is an important funding source for the city, and it's often used to leverage other funds. For our street maintenance program, TransNet is used in conjunction with SB1 funding, gas tax funding, and debt financing. And you'll see here for the maintenance portion of our street maintenance program, this is O&M and slurry seal. Our total expenditures last fiscal year were just over 72 million. 10 million of that was TransNet. And for our CIP street resurfacing program, our total expenditures last year were 17 million, with TransNet about 4 million. And we often leverage TransNet as a match for federal and state grants. A few examples here are our West Mission Bay Drive Bridge project, the Otay Truck Route Widening Phase 4 project, as well as Market Street 47th to Euclid. For West Mission Bay Drive Bridge, we did receive a pretty large HBP grant, Highway Bridge Program grant. We also leveraged TransNet. For the Otay truck route, we did receive a Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, SB1 grant. And for the Market Street project, we did receive an Active Transportation ATP grant. So looking back at fiscal year 2021, TransNet projections were just under 35 million, and actual expenditures were right on 35 million. Broken out by congestion relief and admin and maintenance. Looking at congestion relief, which is our CIP program and project implementation, we did project about 25 million, and we spent just over 24. And for admin and maintenance, we projected 10 million, and our actuals were 10.7 million. So looking at a few of our larger projects and programs, for resurfacing of city streets, we projected last year that we would spend about 4 million, and we actually spent 3.6 million, with another 1.2 million encumbered by the end of the fiscal year. So we're very close to our projection. For Market Street Complete Streets, we projected 2.3 million to be spent in TransNet, and we actually spent 2.4 with an additional 1.6 encumbered in the construction contract. For the Otay truck route, we projected 3.2 million to be spent, actually spent 2.3, and encumbered an additional 1.8 million. And then finally, for our traffic signals projects, and these are for new traffic signal installations, modifications, as well as our interconnect system. We projected to spend about 1.3 million. We actually spent 1.4 with an additional 400,000 encumbered. So through the first half of fiscal year 2022, CIP expenditures totaled approximately 7 million, and nearly 7 million was encumbered in projects. The city is also on track to fully expend its maintenance, administration, and project implementation budgets by the end of the fiscal year. So these are some of our major planned expenditures for FY22. Starting with street resurfacing, we anticipate to spend about 3 million in construction. For our traffic signal program, we expect to spend about 2 million. For the Otay truck route phase 4, which is wrapping up construction, we expect to spend an additional 2.2 million this year. For the Market Street Complete Streets, which is also wrapping up construction, we anticipate to spend 2.6 million. And then for flood resilience infrastructure, this is really for storm drain pipes within the right-of-way. We anticipate to spend about 2 million. I'll now turn it back to Gene, and he'll discuss a few of our TransNet funded projects.
Thanks, Ben. So as Ben reported earlier, the city invests nearly $100 million annually in street maintenance throughout the city. This equates to over 1,600 miles over the last 6 years. Resurfacing is an important function to improve a street's condition, which in turn provides safer traveling for all of our users. It also gives us an opportunity to evaluate the roadway for any minor changes in its use. For example, during the same time period, we installed nearly 340 miles of new or improved existing bike facilities as part of our Resurface Repurpose program. One example of our work was on Rancho Penasquitos Boulevard. Many selections of this collector street were in fair condition. Using TransNet funding, the street was resurfaced and enhanced bike lanes were installed. It is one of nearly 1,000 street segments per year that went from a degraded condition to a smooth pothole-free surface. Next project is our Market Street project that included widening of both Market and Euclid streets. In addition, the project proposed to install new and expanded sidewalks, bike facilities, crosswalks, new medians, driveways, curb extensions, traffic signal modifications, drainage improvement, street resurfacing, and green infrastructure improvements such as a biofiltration system within the medians. The project was given a notice to proceed for construction in August of 2020, and it is approximately 80% completed in construction right now with a completion estimation of May of this year. Now, every project has its unique challenges, and this one had close coordination with active construction projects between the county and private development within the project's vicinity, and the proximity to Choice Creek increased complexity to source viable biofiltration material from local suppliers. Another project is our Otay Mesa Truck Route Phase 4. And this provides for the construction of an additional lane to the existing Otay Mesa truck route between La Media Road and Drucker Lane. The Otay truck route has 2 lanes between La Media and Drucker. Before 2002, 1 lane was used for the laden trucks and 1 lane was reserved as emergency access lane for U.S. Border Patrol and emergency vehicles. Now, after 2002, Mexico required inspection of unladen trucks. The original truck route configuration could not handle the volume of both laden and unladen trucks, and the emergency lane was reconfigured as a truck route. The Otay Truck Route Phase 4 project is constructing an additional lane to the existing route between La Media and Drucker. With the additional lane, there will be once again a dedicated emergency lane for Border Patrol or emergency vehicles. The project is currently in construction, and the construction is expected to be completed by spring of 2022. Another project is a flood resiliency type project, and that's St. Therese Way Emergency Storm Drain Project. Repairs on this project started September 25th, 2020 to fix the sinkhole in a residential street by replacing 157 feet of damaged corrugated metal storm drain pipe with new reinforced concrete pipe. The project repaired the sinkhole and replaced the damaged street pavement. Construction was completed March 26, 2021, and is in the mitigation and monitoring phase for the slope restoration portion of the project. Another similar project is the Montezuma Road Emergency Storm Drain Project. And that project started construction on February 8th, 2019, and was completed June 16th, 2022. It replaced a failed 66-inch diameter corrugated metal pipe, which ran through Montezuma Road and Reservoir Drive at a depth of 40 feet. Failure of this pipe caused a sinkhole adjacent to an adjacent apartment complex. The pipe had to be replaced with new reinforced concrete pipe by digging a launch pit at Montezuma Road and a receiving pit at Reservoir Drive and tunneling between the 2 pits. Due to the size of the pipe, depth, and close proximity of the existing structure, the project had to reline the pipe by tunneling. This required large pits to be dug in the middle of Montezuma Road and Reservoir Road, which made it challenging due to conflicts with other utility lines, traffic mitigation of a busy street as well. In closing, the city has implemented several process improvements to maximize the efficient use of all CIP funding. There is extensive cross-coordination between all stakeholder departments to evaluate when projects need funding. This has significantly reduced instances in which funding is underutilized in projects or projects are delayed for lack of funding. The city is currently developing an enterprise asset management system that will help implement and institutionalize a broader, more holistic approach to our public improvements. What this means is we are aligning all of our needs of each asset type and planning projects based on the greatest benefit and risk reduction overall. For example, if the storm drain, water, or wastewater systems are approaching the end of their useful life and the street is in poor condition, that project will be a higher priority than another street with less total needs. The end result will be a well-planned strategic approach to asset management. That concludes our presentation. Ben, Myrna, and I are available to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Let's go first to public comments. Are there any public comments?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay, let's go to our committee members. Anyone has any comments? I don't see any hands raised yet. Pedro and then Mr. Kenny. Or Mr.
Hi,
Orson.
Gene. How are you?
Hi, Pedro. Good to see you.
Likewise. Hey, I was very interested to hear your last bullet about the implementation of an asset management process. How far along are you? And when do you think you're going to have that? I mean, I'm assuming it's going to take a while to do the inspection of all of the facilities, the streets, the signals, and all of that, but maybe a synopsis of where you all are.
Yeah, our enterprise asset management system is being managed by the Engineering and Capital Works Department. And each asset owning department, so transportation, stormwater, public utilities, we all developed a prioritization schema or a management strategy on how to provide risk data and consequence of failure data to the engineering department. And they're now putting that into this system, running some mock scenarios and kind of validating that process. So I think Myrna may be on the line to maybe provide a little bit more information about when we think we'll have a little bit more information about that. Myrna, are you available?
I am. So we call it the bundling system. So unfortunately, not every single asset department is using the system. So we're doing it both manually and using what we call the AMP system. So when we get a project at the intake state, that's when we do the preliminary assessment of all the assets that are on the system of AMP. And I think we have like sewer and water, transportation, stormwater. I think they're the only ones currently in the system. And then all the other assets like park and rec, environmental service, any of the other asset managing departments, libraries are not in there. We will do a manual assessment based on the community plannings that's out there. And then we manually assess, and then we use it with the computer. If there are projects that exist, then we'll try to correlate and see if we can get them bundled together, no matter what stage they're at. Or sometimes we might even have to delay a project because of the moratoriums that exist. So that's kind of the finagling that the preliminary engineering does. So, and at that time, we also include the asset management departments to come in together and make sure that the funding is available, because sometimes the need is there, but the funding is not. So then there needs to be decisions made on how to proceed.
So Gene and Myrna, I understand the process that you're going, but do you have a plan of when you're going to have everything in the system so that you are doing now, let's say, a street paving project, and you know what's underneath, you know how old it is and all of that, so that now you go, okay, we're doing this street paving, but you know the sewer line underneath here is no good, the storm drain is no good, so we better take care of all of that at the same time.
So we do that now, and those assets that you named are in the AMP system. So that already happens. That's like normal business for us to do that type of assessment. The problem then comes back is the funding there.
Okay, so in the past, you know, one of the things that would irk a lot of folks is that they would see that somebody went in and let's say they did a water line repair project, and the whole water line, you know, trench left the street in terrible repair, and you know, maybe 3-4 years later, you're finally resurfacing that. So you're telling me that that's not going to happen anymore?
No, I didn't say that.
Oh man.
We do, like I said, we do have that in the system. We work with, in this case, it would be transportation department, make sure that say the water is going to go through no matter what, the water and the sewer funding is there, it's going to happen. It's the the planning and the funding that has to be assessed on whether there could be a full upgrade of the street segment, depending on its condition and what funding is available. So that's a dialogue that we do have at prelim, and then maybe we revisit it in design, and then hopefully by the time construction comes, there are fundings available. But right now, the funding is not always available.
Okay, and then my last question, and maybe it's not even a question, maybe it's a statement. I was a little bit surprised to see the amount of money that you spend on slurry seals and OM versus the amount of money that you actually spend on resurfacing or rehabilitating the roads. But you know, that's just me saying that. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kenny, go ahead.
Good morning. This may be the same question Pedro just had, but on the slide for 2022 expenditures, the first line item was a $3 million expense for resurfacing. And then in the narrative that followed, you mentioned a much larger number that was spent annually. Can you describe exactly what is included in that number? And I'd like to hear a discussion about how the city is maintaining their roads. In years past, you got beat up horribly by members of the public who thought you weren't doing it or weren't spending enough. So when I saw $3 million, I was kind of wondering why it was so low. So maybe you could explain that.
Sure, yeah, I can go ahead and start, Gene, and really talk about the funding and the expenditures. So for our street maintenance program, you probably noticed the total expenditures of about 72 million for maintenance. What that includes, it's not just for slurry seal. Slurry seal is actually a fairly small portion of that, but the primary expenditure there is for our street division. Everything that our street division does, all of the maintenance that's done in the right of way, not inclusive of slurry seal. We do spend about $25 to $30 million per year in using many different funding sources for slurry seal, but a vast majority of that 72 million that you saw is to support our street division maintenance operations. Now, for street resurfacing, you noticed a $17 million total expenditures. TransNet was about 3.6 million of that total expenditures. So,
okay. So that was just the TransNet portion?
Exactly, yes. We allocate other funding sources. We have a street damage fee that we allocate and spend. We have a commercial paper program that funds our street maintenance program. We also utilize RMRA, SB1 money, as well as gas tax for that program.
And for all of the street maintenance you do, the slurry seals, grind and overlay, full depth, do you have a number for an annual number for what you think you might spend in 2022?
Yeah, for 2022, for slurry seal, we're looking at about 25 to 30 million right now, and about the same on the street resurfacing side. So about 60 million total. We're hoping that would significantly increase starting next year in fiscal year 23. We do have quite a few very large resurfacing projects coming up that are that are currently in design that will be moving forward into the construction phase next year.
Thank you.
I see Mr. Halpern's hand up. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. And thank you all for participating here today. Really appreciate the fact that over the years, City of San Diego has done a much better job in the spending rates. And that's, I think, what having you come and report out has been all about. So appreciate the progress. But one thing I just want to double check, and I think some of you may recall if you've been here in prior years, I've asked this question. I just want to make sure I'm still current on this. In the past, it was explained to us that you guys wanted to keep sort of a cushion of about $20 million of your TransNet funds. And I'm curious if that's still your intent, or if when you reference the maximized use of funds, you're looking at perhaps a lower cushion.
Yeah, great question, Mr. Halpern, and thank you for asking that. I know you ask that same question every year, and it's a great question. Many people ask that question. So yes, our goal, our fund balance goal is about 15 to 20 million, but it really depends on how many projects we have either in construction or ready to move into construction. We need to make sure that we have enough cash on hand to support our planned expenditures for the fiscal year. And so that includes all of our encumbrances, all the contracts that are encumbered. Right now, we have about $7 to $8 million encumbered into construction contracts and design contracts. So at a bare minimum, we need to have enough cash to support that. But as I mentioned, within the next year or so, we do have quite a large number of projects moving into the construction phase, which is great. But that's going to require a significant amount of encumbrances. And we just need to make sure that we have enough cash on hand to support that.
Gotcha. Okay, appreciate the elaboration. Thanks.
Hey, I have a question as well. Part of the delivery of your program relies on use of consultants for design and other preliminary stages, but it takes so long for the city to bring a consultant on board, which to me causes more delays in spending the money and delivering the program. Can you explain why it takes so long, or what's the city doing to improve the process a little bit?
Thank you. I do know that the Engineering and Capital Projects does manage the consulting activities for design of construction projects, and they do keep a roster of as-needed consultants on staff. And I will turn it over to Myrna to elaborate on that process of how they keep an updated roster. Myrna, are you available?
I am. Good question, Sonny. Thank you very much. It has been a challenge, even more so with the pandemic. Unfortunately, you're absolutely on key that it does take time to get them on board. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic and rising costs, it has taken a little bit longer. So if anything, it would be nice to get back to the normal long, but we're struggling to do that right now. But then look at some of the streamlining efforts to be able to negotiate. So really it's the part after the interviews, the negotiating part that is taking us longer. And I think we're talking to consultants, getting feedback from them, but it's also training our engineering staff that is unfortunately very green. And the pandemic hasn't helped with them not being in-house. So with Rania on board now as the new director of Engineering Capital Projects, we are, she's actually really on board on doing some more informal and formal training for the staff, and maybe even bringing some of these consultants that we've interviewed, some really good positive feedback on what is it that the team's looking for. So we are brainstorming on bringing up new ideas, but also just to get back to the normal timeline would be ideal. There's a lot of stuff happening in the industry. It's so volatile right now for all of us. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We're still trying to heal from what we've learned and what has happened in the last 18 months, almost 2 years now. So yeah, that's something that we're struggling with and hoping to get better quickly more than slowly, because it's hurting us all in every direction.
Great. Thank you, Myrna. I appreciate the explanation. I see Mr. Kenny's hand up. Go ahead. Ask your question.
A quick question. There's currently a 70-30 split on maintenance and design money that TransNet has a limitation. If that changes, would you be able to do more maintenance if that percentage shifted? Would you see that as a good thing, or are there other constraints that kind of dictate how much design and how much maintenance you do?
Absolutely, yeah. We would fully support either eliminating that split or switching that split. We are very limited on the amount of maintenance funding that we receive each year. As everybody knows, we cannot finance maintenance. We can't finance our slurry seal program, so we have to 100% rely on cash. And really the only cash for our slurry seal program is our TransNet maintenance funding, which is currently capped at 30% now. Our RMRA funding, which is about $32 million per year. And any additional gas tax funding that we receive. Beyond those three funding sources, we would really have to rely on our general fund to support our maintenance program. So if that split were to be eliminated or adjusted, it would significantly help our maintenance program.
Thank you.
Very well. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I would like to thank Jean, Ben, and Myrna for being here. Really appreciate hearing the updates. We welcome you to come anytime, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much for having us.
All right. Let's move on to item number 9. It's the FY21 TransNet Local Street and Road Program Annual Status Report. And I think we have Alex here. Alex, welcome and good to see you again.
Nice to see you again, Chair. We don't have a staff report, but I do have a verbal report. And this is something that we do every annual year. Good morning, everyone. So this is the FY 2021 TransNet Local Streets and Road Program Annual Status Report. This is the 9th status report that we provided to Italk, and the information that you provided is attachment 1, I believe, is starting on page 23, is derived from input from the local agency members via the Cities and County Transportation Advisor Committee. So it's an information item, and I have a brief overview of the information that it's provided in the templates and the information that we gather. But just to provide some high-level context and background for the new Italk members. So this report came about as part of the FY 2012 TransNet Triennial Performance Audit Report recommendations, I believe was number 3 through 6, which really focuses on having Sandag take a larger role in monitoring and reporting performance for the local streets and road projects. So as part of that process, going back to 2013, when we started working with CTAC, with input and guidance from Italk at that time on how to address those recommendations. So we started and worked with CTAC and trying to understand and gather information, kind of discovery effort, with the idea of trying to better understand what existing mechanisms, process they have in place that would collect performance or any type of data on the local streets and road program, and ultimately helping us kind of structure a process that would be applicable to all the agencies. Again, with consideration that we would want to minimize the burden on local agencies. So at that time, working through our previous Italk member that was assigned was Mr. Jonathan Tibbetts, and working with CTAC, our findings pretty much indicated that there's a large amount of data that's being collected. Unfortunately, it wasn't common. It was quite different across the agencies. So trying to come up with a structured process was a challenge. Also, as we were working with Italk and also CTAC, we want to make sure that if we put a process in place, that it'll be flexible enough to address everybody's needs. And again, best practices of the local agencies we're doing, again, not to duplicate efforts or make it a burden, but also particularly not duplicate any other efforts that Italk was being presented with. You guys do quarterly reports on financial progress reports and other RTIP requirements. So that's how the templates came about. The idea here is because trying to come up with a more consistent approach. The updates were rather more narrative in nature. Again, trying to maintain flexibility with the local agencies. So that's what you have, all the attachments submitted by the local agencies starting on page 23. But I'm just going to highlight some of the key included in the staff report that was provided, but that we highlighted from some of the submissions for the FY21. For example, there was completion of the railroad crossing safety improvements. really that allowed the establishment of some of quiet zones at 5 at-grade crossings within the city of Oceanside. There was also some significant roadway improvement, safety improvements for including traffic calming, bicycle and pedestrian enhancements within the city of National City, which also included some fiber optic network to improve the transfer and connectivity to their traffic signal system management system. And also some substantial work along the San Marcos Creek within the city San Marcos for improving road safety and adding new pedestrian bicycle infrastructure. But also they included some completion of some to update their traffic signal systems within the city for connection with the traffic management center. And just want to highlight another notable insight. The reason I'm including all these fiber optic or communications, because that was kind of a common theme for a lot of these agencies, including the city of Chula Vista, El Cajon, Imperial Beach, and La Mesa, National City, and City of Vista. But I would like to do just walk you through one example of one submission, which is the city of Chula Vista. So Tim, if you could just bring up that their submission. I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm just going to walk you through, again, some key highlights. For example, the template pretty much starts with a section A. And where we're asking local agencies is just to provide a brief narrative to the point. Hey, what are some of the projects that you want to highlight for the current fiscal year, which is obviously FY 2021? And they pretty much indicated, you know, they have completed the design and construction for 3 transit projects. And they also referenced that they're working on construction for 9 projects. And they also highlighted some key work for the Willow Street Bridge project. So it just provides an opportunity in narrative form to get into some of the key projects that they completed. Then moving on to section B, by way of narrative, then it provides them with a little bit more detail opportunity to highlight some of the key elements of the projects. So they get a little bit more detail into the Willow Street Bridge widening project. And then they also reference, obviously, part of that project that wouldn't be captured in section A is that part of that work is it's habitat mitigation activities for that project. And then moving on to section C, pretty much provides a listing, again, by way of narrative of what they expect to carry out for the next fiscal year. And obviously, one of the key components that they want to highlight is that they're doing some pedestrian improvements along 2 schools, the Hazel G. Cook and the Kellogg Elementary. And they also reference that there's some bike lane improvements and signal improvements along Broadway. And then following to section D, and this section came about, I believe this is the 3rd year or the 2nd year, I can't remember and I apologize, but this section was added at the request of Italk members at that time. Hey, let's start highlighting some of these projects. And so we put the section in to see and provide the opportunity for local agencies to essentially, hey, if there's any pictures or links that we could include in these reports. So the city of Chula Vista included the work that they've been doing and working with the city with us and Caltrans for their Palomar Street rail separation blue line. And want to highlight this project here too, because this is a perfect example where throughout the templates, and you just heard from the city of San Diego that a lot of the TransNet funds are used to support and help advance or match larger funding opportunities. And this is one where the city of Chula Vista actually used for the preliminary engineering and design document about 20% to cover those expenses. And so they've hit a major milestone where the environmental document has been approved and the preliminary engineering has been approved. Now they're working the design. So finally, the last section also provides local agencies with an opportunity to take and provide any notes in reference to spending down or road balances or any comments or notes that they would like to highlight for in terms of administering and carrying out their local streets and road program. And want to bring this up because obviously because of COVID conditions, the city of Chula Vista did indicate that they did experience some temporary shutdowns for construction for some crews for a short period of time, but also there's a lead time for some of the construction components and materials as they noted here. But anyway, this level of information is provided to us, part of this process, collected by local agencies. And it's provided through these templates for all the local agencies. But that's essentially my report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. But if there's any more detailed information requested for specific agency, we could always bring them back and provide that additional information.
Thank you so much, Alex. Clerk, are there any public comments?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay, are any of the Italk members have any questions or comments? Mr. Halpern, go ahead.
Thanks, and thank you for the update, Alex. I've got two questions. First, I'm curious, putting aside that I think the genesis of this was the Toronto performance audit a few years back. From Sandag's standpoint, from a management perspective, do you find that this has been helpful?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it varies. Sometimes we do need some specific information on the local agency. It's always good to go back to these narratives, Stuart. But I think one of the things here is that we're trying to improve is, as we're going through these ordinance amendments, that we actually reconcile and provide a better process to collect this data more electronically. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I'm sure there's an awful lot of work by an awful lot of people that goes into it. And our hope is not to just make work for people, but rather, you know, instill reporting that actually benefits both the constituencies as well as Sandag and its planning. So I appreciate that, the candor on that one. The second thing I'm curious about is, because I'm not, you know, a construction person, an engineer person, as some of my colleagues are, is there any way to qualitatively assess or characterize the quality of roadways in Jersey? Are there any sort of universally accepted sort of scoring, if you will? Because one of the things that the Toronto performance audit has spoken to a couple of times is the difference between outputs and outcomes. The outputs being we've completed a bunch of projects, but the real goal isn't necessarily just completing projects, right? It's getting the quality of the roadways, in this case, up to higher standards. And so I'm wondering if, to the extent that there are ways that people such as yourself and people in the industry qualitatively measure standards, if that's something that, as we move into the next regional plan and we're talking about reporting from constituents, entities, that we could also build into the process. So we have a little bit of more of a summary scorecard, if you will, as to how all the invested money is actually hopefully increasing the quality of the roadways amongst all the cities.
No, and this is a great question. Maybe one of the more detailed discussions that I didn't speak to, but as part of that initial discovery effort, Stuart, is that we were just simply trying to understand the mechanisms and the type of data they collect. But one of the key elements in that TransNet ordinance, which is still being carried through our current amendments to the ordinance, is payment conditions, because there's a specific methodology that the industry captures. It's PCI or even RI at the federal level. But what we found out during that discovery is that everybody does it differently, different time scales. Maybe one agency does it maybe every other 2 years or 1 year. So at that time, we did understand that, hey, there's this level of information, but it's not consistent regional wide. Other MPOs actually do have a payment management system, which has a consistent methodology to collect, because we all want to be maybe reporting on the same platform or baseline. So one of the key things moving forward is part of the TransNet ordinance, as we carry out a more performance monitoring for outcomes, is that we're going to be working with the local agencies, recognizing that there's a limit, but maybe bringing them out together to maybe have a consistent approach, methodology, and maybe carry out that through a uniform system. And payment, mobility, and safety are sort of the key measures that we are going to be carrying out as we implement or carry forward the ordinance amendments.
Yeah, that would be great because the next iteration of this process, it would be wonderful to have that kind of scoring system, so to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Orso. Go ahead.
I just wanted to reiterate what Alex said about the pavement condition index. It is something that it is used widely. There are different methodologies, like Alex said, from the most crude method that you get on a car, you ride it, and if it feels rough, then you get a low condition index, and then you look at it and you go, okay, it has so many potholes, and you record that, and then you get a number based on that, to a really sophisticated system that now is using digital cameras, sensors on the vehicles that you're driving, and it's basically automated. And depending on the agency, they do it once a year, every 2 years, or every 3 years. And their goal is to get above a certain number, because what ends up happening is that if you're at a threshold that your condition has deteriorated so much, if you put a simple overlay or a slurry seal, all you're doing is just a cosmetic fix. You're not really fixing the road, and now you need to rehab it completely, and you're trying to avoid to get to that point. But when the road is already at that point, you might as well just bite the bullet and do it. But it would be great if we could get to that point that Alex is talking about and you are talking about, where everyone is playing to the same sheet of music and saying, okay, you know, we all know what the condition index is on our streets, and we need to get them up, and this is how we're going to invest our money. One quick question, where are we with that area where we're thinking about changing the 70-30 on the monies so that it could be used for maintenance?
Oh, that's a great question, and I heard the previous comment, but I think Ariana is going to speak to kind of the overall process for making some amendments to the TransNet ordinance. Ariana?
Yes, so we have been making the rounds. We have made a presentation at the Cities and Counties Transportation Advisory Committee, for example. We've been bringing a set of other presentations, not only to the Italk, but also to the board and the Transportation Committee, to name a few. So, you know, we want to continue to make sure that all the input, that we continue to receive the input from all these stakeholders, continue to meet with our working groups, our PACs, and, you know, we're looking to continue collaborating. So, you know, we will continue doing that, and the plan is to come back sometime in the near future to summarize all of those and bring that forward for your consideration.
Thank you.
Good. I don't see any other hands raised. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Ariana, for the explanation. I do want to send my appreciation to all the cities for putting this together. I know it looks like a lot of work, but when as a taxpayer and as an Italk member, when I see the volume of work being done with TransNet dollars, it really makes me happy to see that my tax dollars are going towards something good for my region. So it's nice to see it. It'd be great if it could be automated. So I give my thank and appreciation to CTAC and other members of the cities. And thank especially Oceanside, Oceanside and Chula Vista, because I like seeing the pictures. So it's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on. Item number 10. We're on item number 10, waiver of review for time extension and scope modifications for Sandag grant program. And we have Ms. Russo with us. Go ahead.
Good morning, Italk members. My name is Jenny Russo. I am the grants program manager here at Sandag. I am bringing an item forward to you to ask for your recommendation. Alex mentioned a little bit of this in his item sort of towards the end, but you may know this. We've all kind of experienced it, I think, in our personal lives, that the pandemic is still having a big impact on just day-to-day things going on out in the world. We're still seeing a lot of folks that are, worry about taking public transit or being in crowded spaces with other folks. The supply chain still hasn't completely recovered. I think the numbers are improving enough where we're seeing folks come back to work, but we've definitely had worker shortages and driver shortages and all sorts of things like that. So the impact that it has on our grant programs has been fairly significant, actually. Over the last probably 6 months or so, we saw things starting to improve last summer into last fall as, the state started to reopen, and then with the resurgence of the new strains, we're seeing kind of a crawling back of that improvement. So one of the things that we were interested in is we're seeing this uptick in requests from our grant recipients that have the same common theme throughout, that it's pandemic related issues. We have seen some improvements to our grantees. So what we're talking about in this item is not a full regression back to what we had, during the peak of the pandemic, because there's certain things, we figured out how to use Zoom, we figured out how to do public meetings remotely, things like that. But there's other things that you still can't do with the way that things are operating. So the intent of this item is to try and help streamline, bring some relief to our grantees, since we're seeing so many of these requests. And what we're looking for is a 6-month waiver of taking amendments either for scope changes that are pandemic related things. So maybe they need to do a service change, or maybe there's a supply chain issue or something like that, or time extensions, anything that can be directly tied back to the pandemic. Asking for a waiver for those items to come forward to Italk, as well as our policy advisory committees. We track all of that information, and it is reported back out regardless to all of you on our quarterly status report. So we would continue to do that, but we're looking for some relief, some administrative relief in the meantime, as we're seeing so many of these coming forward. So you wouldn't have to see as many amendments that all have the same common thing throughout. So that's what we're proposing, is this 6-month trial, see how things go. Hopefully things, keep moving forward, keep progressing, and we can be done with this. If things continue on and we still have more issues, we would bring something back and kind of inform you how things have been going. Maybe things are a little bit different and we need something else. But that's what we're looking forward to, or we're asking for today. And we would take this item to the board later this month and see if they would approve it as well. So I will give this back to the chair, and I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Russo. This is an item requiring a vote. Staff is asking for a recommendation from our committee. So I'm going to go to Mr. Fuller. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. This is something that I would fully support. As a state agency, I'm experiencing issues with COVID and supply chain, and my projects aren't getting done. I don't have enough staff. I can't get the materials that I need on projects that we're building or have under construction. So I'd be fully supportive of this. I won't make a recommendation at this time or a motion, but happy to after the discussion.
Okay. Mr. Urso?
Kenny, hi, a quick question. If I look at the gray box on the staff report, it says pending approval, the chief executive officer will have authority to continue the non-use of vehicles grant scope change amendments, as well as extension of up to 12 months per grant for 6 months due to COVID. So I guess you're saying he's going to have 6 months window to do 12-month extensions?
That's the idea, is if someone needs a 12-month extension. Yes, it's worded a little bit weird.
So Hassan will have 6 months to grant up to 12 months.
Correct.
For the next 6 months.
For the next 6 months, he could give extensions up to 12 months if needed.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Halpern and then Mr. Frankel.
Yeah, I was gonna raise the same point that Pedro just did. I think this needs to be drafted a little bit more precisely for when it gets proposed to the board, because the way it's written right now is a little fuzzy. So but I fully support the spirit and the intent. I just think that you might want to try to draft it in a way that's a little bit more clear, that it's kind of a one-time 6-month option, if you will, for the CEO. Right?
Yep, absolutely. I
Right,
appreciate
thank you.
that.
Yeah.
Mr. Frankel.
Jimmy, I have 2 questions. One, it appears that currently the executive director or staff has the authority to grant an extension of less than 6 months. So this authority is needed to go beyond that 6-month period.
Yes, so they executive director can do a one-time 6-month extension. So some of these programs they've already received that, or they need more than that. You know, a 6-month isn't enough. So that's what we're looking for, is to add on to that period. So instead of it being 6 months, it would be a year if it's COVID related.
And my second question is, obviously these extensions are related to COVID. You know, how does staff or the executive director vet grantees when they say, hey, I've got an issue related to COVID? How do we determine it's related to COVID and not related to some other issue potentially related to operations? How are we vetting these claims of delay related to COVID?
Yeah, we're actually really strict about it. So somebody can't just come to me and say, hey, I need an extension for COVID relief. We ask them, what do you need? What are your issues? Our board policy asks them to specify in their requests, you know, what things are happening, what have they done to try and prevent it, what actions will be taken to continue to perform. So even if they received a 12-month extension, how are you going to get back on track? So we don't just grant them blanketly. There are some that we bring forward and say, this has nothing to do with COVID. This is more of an operational issue, or maybe it's seasonal or something like that. But mostly the ones that we're seeing are these ones that are about, you know, staff shortages or medical issues or supply chain. Those are the 3 main ones that we see that we've talked about in the report.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any other hands, but judging by the comments and a little bit of confusion, Jenny, maybe if you want to state what you expect Italk to recommend and what you're asking for again, so that everybody's clear before we take a vote.
Sure. So we are asking for a recommendation to the board of directors to waive the policy advisory committee review of time extension amendments and scope changes for grantees that cannot perform under their current schedule due to COVID-19, and allow the executive director to approve extensions of up to 12 months between the period of January 1, 2022 to June 30th of 2022.
Perfect. Okay. Is the committee interested in making this recommendation? Mr. Kenny?
Just a quick question. So the director's office and the policy advisory committee, they're both on board with this?
We believe so, yes.
There wasn't an issue with the policy advisory committee not doing what they were supposed to be doing, or what is the challenge with the policy advisory committee?
The challenge really is just our agendas, as you know, are so full, and to try and get things on an agenda is really tough these days. And there's so many of these that's happening. So we could take them to them. It's just an administrative burden for staff and timing, but there's no issue in taking them if we needed to.
And this will just stay until somebody changes it?
No, this is only for 6 months. So this is between now and June, and then it would reset back to the current policy and going to policy advisory committees and Italk.
Okay, well, I'm happy to make a motion if there's no other discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny. Is anyone else interested in making a second? Mr. Urso?
We'll do that. I'll second it.
Okay. All right. Let's take a vote. Clerk? are you?
Yes, my mute button got stuck.
No worries, no worries.
Thank you. CEO, Private Sector Chair Sunny House.
Yes.
Finance Budgeting Vice Chair Stuart Halpern.
I would vote yes. If I could just throw out there, I presume, Jenny, there will be, for sake of governance and transparency, there will be at a follow-up report, you'll review which of those extensions do get made, et cetera. So
Exactly.
but I've voted in support. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Real Estate Right-of-Way, Jonathan Frankel. Mr. Frankel.
Yes, excuse me, sorry.
Biology Environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Proof.
And our licensed engineer is absent. Licensed Civil Engineer, Traffic Engineer, Michael Kinney.
Approved.
Contractor Construction, Pedro Urso Delgado.
Approved.
And that motion passes.
Thank you, clerk. And thank you, Jenny. Appreciate it. We'll see you when you come back and report again. Okay, we are on item 11 and we have quite a few to go. We're about right on time. So I would ask everyone to be precise and concise so that we can get this done right at or end on or before 12 o'clock. Item number 11 is Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee membership terms and selection process. I believe Julie is not available and Ariana will report on this.
Chair House, actually, I believe the chair of your subcommittee, Jonathan Frankel, is ready to walk us through this item.
Yes.
Okay with you? Yeah.
Did that before. Yes, go ahead,
Thank you.
Jonathan.
Chair House, and thank you, Ariana. Good morning, committee members. As you know, the subcommittee continues work on incorporating various recommendations from our triennial performance audit into what will be amendments to the statement of understanding regarding the implementation of the Italk. This is a document about our operations that is incorporated by reference into the TransNet Ordinance. And we discussed at a previous meeting generally the objectives of the subcommittee, which is related to expanding membership to include individuals with more diverse areas of expertise and background, as well as the selection process, screening and selection process, and finally conflict of interest, as well as service limits. And so attached to your agenda packet for today's agenda is an updated red line of the modifications to the statement of understanding to reflect these changes, and specifically to reflect your feedback provided at our previous meeting related to a couple of items that I will highlight. This is page 76 of the agenda packet. Firstly, we added the word engineer, licensed engineer, that terminology back in to the description of one of the membership categories. And that, I believe, was in response to a comment from Les at a previous meeting regarding the elimination of that language. And secondly, we added the term substantial experience related to a member, hopefully, that we will obtain that has experience in emerging transportation technology. There was some discussion at our previous meeting about the kind of 10 years of experience requirement associated with the other categories. And we felt that substantial experience would pick up that comment. Folks may not have precisely 10 years, given that these technologies are new, but we did want to incorporate that language in response to comments. There were some other minor modifications made, cleanup items, as I would characterize them. But those are available for your review. And Chair House, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it. Are there any members of the public that have any comments?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay. Any members of the Italk that have any more comments on the language? I don't see any comments. Jonathan, perhaps you can maybe explain where we go from here. Since we have no comments, we will eventually come for a vote, but maybe you can explain what the plan is going forward.
Sure, and Ariana can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong as to when the timing. I believe that these changes will be presented eventually to the board, and my understanding is that would occur in the spring, and that would be after the committee, of course, votes to advance. If and when the committee votes to advance these changes to the board, that the board would consider these ordinance amendments sometime in the spring.
Ariana, anything else to add?
No, not at this time. Yeah, other than, same as with the 70-30, we'll continue working with you, the Italk members and other committees, working groups, just to make sure we get all the input necessary as we move forward with these sometime in the future.
Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate all the Italk members' input in this. We, as the subcommittee, are happy with this language to move forward, and we'll keep you appraised of the progress, and hopefully come back to you in the next Italk meeting to make a recommendation for this amendment to go through. So, okay, let's move on to item number 12. Proposed FY23 Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee Annual Operating Budget. And Ariana, are you going to discuss this one? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I can cover this one. Thank you so much. So this is your proposed FY23 Italk annual operating budget. The ordinance requires that the Italk submit an annual operating budget to the board of directors each year for approval. That's supposed to happen 90 days before, no later than 90 days before the board approves its budget. The ordinance states that all the costs for administering Italk activities are to be paid from TransNet sales tax proceeds, and the funds made available to Italk are not to exceed $250,000. That's the base year amount after an adjustment for inflation each year. So for fiscal year 23, this equals approximately $461,000, which we've outlined in attachment 1 to your report. The Italk operating budget funds the administration of Italk activities, including your fiscal and performance audits, development of your annual report, your legal consultant service expenses, for example. This year, consistent with the agency's commitment to provide equitable access to publicly held meetings, the Italk operating budget is also proposed to include $8,000 for language interpretation services based on the fee schedule, which is also included as an attachment to your report. Sandag has on-call contracts with 3 language interpretation vendors, which have been providing translation services for Italk meetings since this past summer. So in the spirit of equity and inclusion noted in the agency's regional plan, in addition to asking for your recommendation that the board approve your fiscal year 23 budget, Italk also is asked to approve the use of the existing Sandag contracted services for language interpretation. Alternatively, Italk could conduct its own procurement for these services, which would entail establishing a subcommittee to develop the scope of work, the budget that would be included in a request for offers. That would take approximately 3 months to complete at a cost of about $15,000. So today we are asking the Italk to, number 1, recommend that the board of directors approve the proposed Italk operating budget as part of the fiscal year 23 Sandag overall program budget in substantially the same form as attached. And number 2, approve the use of existing Sandag contracted services for language translation.
Very well. Are there any public comments on this item?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay, before we take a vote, are there any comments by Italk committee members? I don't see any hands raised. Can I ask for a motion to approve both items that are being requested here? Mr. Fuller.
Yes, I would approve the recommendation as Ariana stated it.
Okay. Item basically 1 and 2 both. Okay, thank you. Is there a second? Mr. Halpern?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you very much. If there are no other discussions, I don't see any other hands raised. Please go ahead, clerk, and take a vote.
CO Private Sector Chair Sunny House,
Yes.
Finance Budgeting Vice Chair Stuart Halpern,
Yes.
Real Estate Right-of-Way Jonathan Frankel, okay, Biology Environmental Dustin Fuller,
Yes.
Licensed Engineer is absent, Licensed Civil Engineer Traffic Engineer Michael Kinney,
Approve.
Contractor Construction Pedro Orso Delgado,
Yes.
and that motion passes.
Thank you, clerk, and thank you, Italk members. Let's move on to item number 13. We're doing good on time. And we're gonna hear about, first of all, the quarterly financial report and overview of developments in the market. I have both Andre and Jim, I believe. Who's going first?
I'll go first. Chair House, and morning to the members of the committee. Good morning. So as you mentioned, this is an informational item on the financial markets that we bring to you on a quarterly basis. Now, this report is based on the second quarter for fiscal year 22, or as of December 31st, 2021. The prior report as of September 30th, 2021 was on consent at your December meeting due to time constraints. But going forward, hopefully we'll make the presentations already to you as requested by the Italk. Now, this is a fairly lengthy report, and we present our entire debt and investment profile in these reports. The same report goes to the board of directors and then is posted to our investor relations website for the benefit of all interested parties, generally the rating agencies, our member agencies, and investors alike. But I know that you are busy, so I would suggest that you focus on the first summary page as your main takeaway, and hopefully my oral report along with Jim's will kind of give you a highlight of the changes since the prior quarter and discuss what we are currently working on. So after me, Jim will present an update on the state of the local and national economy, as well as an update on our sales tax. I'd also like to welcome Jim back to Sandag. As you're aware, the last time I presented with Stephanie, she moved on to Qualcomm. So we're fortunate to convince Jim to come back out of retirement to Sandag. So there was only one substantial change to our debt portfolio over the last quarter, and that is that we completed the release of our 2008 debt service reserve fund for approximately $17 million, which will give us more proceeds for current and existing projects. The 2008 series was the very first bond issuance that we did since TransNet 2 was passed. Since then, we have had 10 bond issuances, which have not required a debt service reserve fund. As a reminder, the commission is highly rated as a AAA entity, and really debt service reserve funds are not required for such a highly rated entity. So we're able to take that money and put it towards projects as opposed to sitting and earning kind of negligible interest in today's environment. As a reminder, it was last year this time where we took advantage of the really low interest rate environment, and we refinanced our undrawn TIFIA loan, our 2008 short-term notes, a portion of our 2014 bonds, and we also had a new money issue. It was a great time to go into the markets as we saved about $160 million in present value savings and issued $130 million funding for new projects. Now, we are certainly pleased that we took advantage of the situation last year, as we have seen rates generally trend up this year, especially in the last couple of months since the Federal Reserve hasn't indicated that they'll raise short-term rates up to 3 times this year, although some experts on Wall Street are saying that we'll probably even see 6, 7, or even as many as 8 interest rate hikes this year to kind of stem the record inflation that we are all witnessing. Now, the one positive of this inflation is that we are seeing that our growth in our sales tax numbers has got to extraordinary levels that we've never seen before. Just to give you some context, in the last 32 years, our annual sales tax grew at an average rate of 3.9% annually. We've only had 1 year of double-digit growth, and that was back in 1998. We had 10.7% growth. But this year, we are up by approximately 22% for the first 7 months of the year. Obviously, that is very strong, coupled with the fact that last year we had a very strong 9.2% last year. Jim will get into more details a little bit later in this presentation. Currently, we do have a $100 million commercial program, which we're drawn about 50%. And we are currently working on a new $100 million line, similar to if you have a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, just money there for maybe emergencies, if you will. And in the case that we're doing it is that we know that the state has a surplus along with the federal $1 trillion stimulus plan that's out there. We want to make sure that we have available cash as match if necessary. So we'll report back to you on these efforts at our next quarterly update. Just looking at our investments right now, we have approximately $1 billion in investments, 975 million to be exact, in several investment accounts. We're currently yielding about 47 basis points. However, we anticipate that our return will be significantly higher by the end of the year with the interest increases that I just talked about from the Federal Reserve. One of the main probably positives to take away from this report today is that our debt service coverage ratio continues to improve. If you compare it to right before the pandemic, it was about 3 times. Today is at 3.48 times, which is approximately a 16% increase. I would say the 2 main factors for that is the refinancings that we did earlier last year, coupled with the strong sales tax growth that we've had. So a real positive for our entire program. So at this point, maybe I can turn it over to Jim, who will give you an update on the local and national economy.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me, Chair and Committee. I have a couple slides. Kendall will pull those up now. As Jenny noted in her early report, the COVID is kind of still in control of the economy. You'll see on the upper left, the Dow Industrials, the equity markets are kind of jumping all over the place. In fact, in the week since I prepared the slide, it's gone up about 1,400 points, at least as of 10 minutes ago when I looked. I can't promise what it's doing right now. So it's kind of been a wild ride on Wall Street, but you can see year over year, it's up fairly healthy. We've also saw on the upper right, you can see real GDP growth for the last 4 quarters. And you see we really had a very, very robust 2021, with the exception of the 3rd quarter. There was growth there too, but the other 3 quarters in 2021 were really quite excellent. Fastest economic growth since 1984. And forecasters are generally in the 3 to 4%, 3.5 to 4% range forecasting for next year. Down in the lower left, the federal funds effective rate, Andre just mentioned, has been very, very low, about 0, effectively 0 for the last couple of years since COVID hit. And the Fed is planning on hiking that to combat inflation, which you see on the bottom right. Inflation jumped quite dramatically in the second half of 2021, up to really levels we haven't seen since the early 1980s, based on increased demand for goods. We haven't been able to go out to eat, so there's been a lot of demand for goods. We've been building home gyms, home offices, doing gardening and home improvement. Lots of things like that have helped drive up inflation. Has supply chain issues, which result again from COVID, as you understand. So again, COVID in control of the economy. Next slide, please, Kendall. This looks a little more at San Diego specifically. Our unemployment rate is down to 4.6%, a little bit more than what we saw pre-COVID. It was in the 3.5% range really, but we're seeing nice, healthy improvement in the labor market. Typically, you see San Diego below the US and California. We're below California in general, but we're a little bit higher than the US now. That's because we have such a robust hospitality industry, which was hit pretty hard. But as, again, COVID recedes, we hope to see that improve and the labor market improve generally. Wages on the upper right have been rising, just not fast enough to keep up with inflation. So average annual earnings rose 3.8%, but inflation rose more than that. One of the reasons that people aren't feeling quite as rosy about the economy as some of these other positive numbers would suggest. Another drag on San Diego in particular is housing prices shot up about 18% last year to $817,000 for the median home, and that includes multifamily units. So that's just not a single family home, that's any sort of housing unit in San Diego. And that means that only about 20% of San Diego households could afford a medium price home. And that is that could be really difficult when it comes to recruiting from outside the region, keeping people from leaving who might seek greener pastures elsewhere. So it's it's really incumbent upon us to continue to push to build more housing, because that's really the only way out of higher housing prices is to increase more units. And as Andre said in his brief overview, we've seen very robust growth in TransNet revenues. In FY 2022, we're actually expecting $373 million. That's actually up not 9.2%, but 11.7%. And based on the growth we've seen so far in the first half of FY 2022, we could exceed that. For 2022, we are planning, and we'll discuss this more in the next agenda item, but we are tempering expectations for FY 2023, just because as COVID, we hope fades from the scene, we could see increased spending in non-taxable items like services and restaurants and things like that we're all eager to get out and do again. So we're not necessarily expecting to see a continuation of these incredibly robust increases in revenues. So that's my brief presentation. I wanted to respect your time and keep us on schedule.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome back.
Thank you.
So let me see, first of all, are there any public comments?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Very well. Are any of our Italk members that have any comments? Mr. Halper?
Thanks. Appreciate the presentation. You know, Andre, when you mentioned the increasing debt service coverage, a thought came to mind. I know that in various occasions, Hassan has mentioned that there really isn't any money left in the TransNet program to pay for more projects. I'm curious if you've looked at sort of an incremental debt capacity analysis to the extent that Sandag was willing to sort of push a little bit further on its debt and give up its AAA rating, perhaps to go down to a AA rating or even a single A. If there would be a noteworthy increase in debt capacity that perhaps could be used to pay for additional projects, or when you do that exercise, you're really not getting enough bang for the buck, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I can start off by saying, we are working on a plan of finance that we'll probably bring to you later this summer that'll kind of take a deeper dive into our debt portfolio. But maybe as a reminder, when we issued one of the series earlier this year, we actually put it on our second, not our senior lien, but our second lien. And we didn't see any incremental increase in the interest rates, maybe 5 basis points, but we thought that was worthwhile putting it on there. So that's something that we definitely have it as an option. We've actually even used it. I think we'd be very cautious of losing our AAA. We could probably go down to like a 2.8 level, and right now we're at 3.45. So we're way above that. So, as far as Hassan's comment about we're kind of out of money right now, that was probably the case maybe a year and a half ago. But with these increases that we've seen in sales tax, coupled with the fact that we're taking a closer look at kind of the projects that are upcoming and reviewing our plan of finance, I think we'll be able to get you a better answer as far as, issuing of additional debt for projects. But right now, our plan of finance shows that we're not going to issue any debt this year. That's why we're, again, the $100 million line, just in case something comes up, it's good to have in our back pockets. But to answer your questions further, I think if you'll wait until the end of the summer, we'll come back and give you a really clear picture as to where we stand and where we think we're going to end up.
Okay, I have a question. Looking at the projections and where we are with this year's projection, compared to going back before COVID, you probably had a certain projection of tax, revenue increases. How do we compare? Did you kind of lower your expectations and then now it's up? How does that compare basically?
So let me answer that question from the actual numbers perspective, and then maybe Ray or Jim can give some more color. But when the pandemic initially hit, we thought that sales tax revenues would go down by about 13%. Now, there were some cities, including like the city of San Francisco, that projected as high as 50%. But kind of fast forward as to where the pandemic ended up, hats off to Ray and his economic team, because they were probably the least pessimistic, and it turned out that we were kind of a break-even year. So we ended up just maybe 1% down as opposed to 13% down. So we went back to the board in that last year and actually increased our budget just to kind of give us some relief. Now this year we projected that we'd be up 3.75%, but as you can see, we were kind of way off base. The numbers are significantly high, 22%. Now we still got another 5 months to go, so we expect that that'll taper off a little bit, and we're projecting approximately a 12% increase for the full fiscal year. But maybe Jim and Ray can kind of answer to some of the reasons why. Obviously, besides the stimulus that we saw, there was a Waiver decision that increased sales tax collections on internet sales, but there are a number of factors that hit that. We knew that we're out there, but we didn't think that there'd be as much of a positive impact that we saw. So Ray, Jim?
Yeah, I will say that looking at our long-term forecast that we do a couple of times a year, we are really back in the long run out to 2048. We're back to a pre-pandemic total, basically. This has gotten us back there. Now we are tempering expectations for the next few months in FY23, but Andre's really right. The robust federal intervention, putting stimulus checks and expanded unemployment benefits into people's pockets did help prop up consumer spending. And really, in America, when there's a crisis, we go out and buy things. We did need to build home gyms and home offices, but we had time on our hands. We couldn't travel, we couldn't eat out. So there was that. We also didn't see a big disruption in income for higher earners who do obviously support a lot of our TransNet and sales tax. So there were a bunch of factors that made it so that we didn't see the big dip that we might have expected. And again, things have been quite robust since the depths of the pandemic, but we're not, as we say, we're expecting that to taper off a little bit. We're trying not to get too overly optimistic.
In addition to that, Jim kind of alluded to the fact that there was a shift in spending patterns. So when people stopped traveling and they stopped purchasing services, things like massages or hair, dressers, that type of stuff, what ended up happening is that people spent a tremendous amount of money on taxable goods, on durable and non-durable goods. That's where the money went. And you can see that with the increases in Amazon, for instance, which, as you also alluded to, are now capturing all of that money. So that was a very positive thing. The other thing too that we need to remember is that as we have these relatively high rates of inflation, they're on consumer goods, and so what ends up happening is that people are paying more in sales tax now. I mean, the dollars are worth less than they were prior to COVID, but if you experience 7% in inflation in those taxable goods, then you're paying taxes on. I mean, you can kind of subtract that right out of the increase that we have, right? Because now you go out to dinner, and instead of it being $50 for two people, it's now almost $100, right? You end up paying twice as much in sales tax on that. And so we do see an increase in revenue. I think that what we need to be careful about is what the buying power is of that money, because construction costs at the same time have gone through the roof. And we've seen increases 30, 40%. In some cases, lumber was $100 a sheet, for instance, at one point. So I think that we need, once we get a little bit more stabilized, we'll be able to do a long-term forecast and see where we really sit. And then the important thing from my perspective is to look at that in real dollar terms versus not just the inflated dollars. It's going to look great. We're going to be collecting a lot more in sales tax, okay, but it's not buying as much. So that we can't really build significantly more projects because of the taxes that we are bringing in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Stuart, did you have your hand up still, or is that a new comment? Okay, very good. Thank you so much. This is such a moving target and such a challenging job. I'm glad you're all on board to do this. Thank you again. Let's move on to item number 14, FY22 revisions for FY23 through 27 TransNet program and TransNet related revenues. Jim and Ariana, are you?
Yes, thank you, Chair House. I'll go ahead and kick it off, and then we are both available for questions. So this item, as you mentioned, is the short-term revenue forecast. It's brought to the Italk, the Transportation Committee, and the Board of Directors each year in February. These estimates allow Sandag and our partner agencies to plan for capital projects and to determine operating subsidies for fiscal year 23 through 27. And then this year, we're also proposing to revise the fiscal year 22 estimates, as mentioned in the prior report. The attachment to your report provides the estimate for the overall TransNet program. It includes a breakdown of the major corridors, new bus rapid transit and rail operations, transit system improvements, local street and road improvement subprograms. The assumptions for the forecast were reviewed in a peer review process meeting, including external experts, and the panel concluded that the methodology is valid and the forecast is reasonable. In addition, the current forecast went through our QA/QC process, and Jim Miller is here to answer specific questions about that. For fiscal year 22, the TransNet revised anticipated revenues are about $373 million, which is higher than those approved by the board back in February 2021. This reflects an increase of about 16% over the board approved estimates back in February of 2021. So while this revision reflects a significant short-term increase consistent with recent presentations at the board regarding the updated TransNet revenue forecast, we're still projecting additional funding will be needed to complete the program in the long term, as you know. For fiscal year 23, the growth is forecast at 0.7%, so that there's more of a tempering there, consistent with what Jim shared earlier. And then TransNet revenues are anticipated at approximately $375 million. The estimates are scheduled to be reviewed by the Transportation Committee at its meeting later this month for a recommendation to the board as well at the end of February. And then upon board approval, the estimates would be released to the transit agencies, the local agencies, for their planning and programming use. And Jim and I are here for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ariana. Are there any comments from the members of the public?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Very well. Any Italk members have comments, questions? Mr. Halpern?
Yeah, just very quickly, thanks for the update. Going through the report, I noticed, and I think it's attachment 2, there's reference to the sources that you're using for some of the forecasts. I don't think there's a reference, at least I didn't see, for who the peer reviewers are. I think for enhanced confidence and transparency, it might be useful going forward if you, unless there's any reason, I don't know, if contractually you're not able to publicly disclose, you might want to just throw in who the peer review folks are, just again for added confidence. I think it's a great thing that you're doing and I appreciate it.
Sounds good.
Very well. Okay, I don't see any other comments. Thank you very much for the information. Let's move on to item number 15. And this is our quarterly TransNet financial report for basically December, for period ending 2021. So I believe this is all Andre and Marcus, is that correct?
Yes, Chair House, that's correct. I will be presenting item number 15. Just give me 1 second to share my screen.
All right.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, members of Italk. My name is Marcus Pasquale, and I've prepared the quarterly TransNet financial report for Q2 based on recommendations from the first and second TransNet triennial performance audits. The main considerations this quarter, our debt to revenue ratio is at 3.48 times, meaning for every $1 of debt service, we have $3.48 of TransNet revenue, providing ample coverage. Cumulative fiscal year's sales tax revenues through December 2021 came in 22.5% higher when compared to last fiscal year through December. And in the fiscal impact box, you can see what those figures were: 100.4 million versus 82 million. All cities are within the allowable 30% limitation for spending. At this point, if there are any questions on any of the attachments, I'd be happy to pull them up, but if not, I will go ahead and conclude my presentation.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Are there any comments from members of the public?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Very well. Any comments or questions from the members of Italk? Mr. Halpern, go ahead. You're having a...
I think your mic is muted, Stuart. There you go.
Just give me 1 second to make sure. I just want to find the particular chart I was looking at that I wanted to speak to. Hold on 1 second.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess it's attachment 7.
Attachment 7. Okay. Yep.
So, you know, and this is actually less a question, I think, for you, Marcus, than perhaps for my peers. You know, earlier we had the presentation for the city of San Diego, and one of the issues for the city as to why they've been asked to come report to us is that over time, they seem not to have done an especially good job of spending the monies that they were getting from us. And they've, you know, improved pretty significantly. If I'm reading this correctly, it strikes me that the county actually is perhaps in the kind of place that the city of San Diego had been in prior years, where it seems like the county is having some issues spending the dollars that they're giving to them. So I guess maybe first, Marcus, you could tell me if I'm reading this right, but to the extent that I am, I would throw out to my committee members, to the extent that we're having the city of San Diego come and report to us on this question, I wonder if we should similarly ask the county, you know, because also with the city, if you take into account that their practice is to keep a $20 million cushion, which personally I think is a bit rich, but if that's their practice, then they're really spending, you know, really pretty much all that there is for them to spend within that policy of maintaining the cushion, whereas the county seems to be like a real outlier here. So again, first, maybe Marcus, tell me if I'm reading this wrong, and then secondly, I'd open up to my colleagues for consideration of whether we might want to ask the county to come to give the same kind of report that the city of San Diego did.
Yeah, Stuart, first off, I just want to say you're probably looking at the 67.7% for the county, right?
Yes, yeah.
Right. So this is as of December 31, and assuming they spend all their programming this year, it's going to be 88% by the end of the year. Yes, it does seem that they're a little behind at this time, but I do expect that they'll be over the 75% threshold by the end of the year. I'm not sure if I answered your question accurately.
Yeah, you do. I guess we could wait and see, but I guess I would sort of put them on a watch list.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And
go ahead.
Yeah, just to add, if they don't meet that 75% threshold by the end of the year, we do ask them to provide a letter as to the reason why. So that's part of our procedures.
Stuart, you're kind of right on point, because I also noticed in the reports that all the jurisdictions did, county had very little, delivery or completion listed in there. So that kind of is in line with what you're suggesting. Michael, Kenny, please go ahead and give us your comment.
With respect to having the agencies come in and present, like we've had the past 2 meetings, is the intent to work our way through the entire list over the next couple of years, or?
We're just taking it one quarter at a time. We're just inviting folks to come, unless there's a question like this, and unless we want to, maybe hear more about what some of the issues are with delays in using TransNet. Our intention was to just hear from the various jurisdictions on a voluntary basis, to maybe just work through the list as you suggested, but it's only voluntarily on a quarterly basis. That was the goal of Italk. This is a different issue with having to maybe question what the county is doing as far as expenditure, and how get a progress update on where they are with their program regarding TransNet dollars. So,
well, I'd support inviting the county. Hopefully a Zoom meeting is something that they could attend, and I don't think we need a presentation as much as just kind of an explanation. So
okay, well, let's give it a couple of months, because as Marcus mentioned, they seem to intend to want to use at least up to 80% and maybe depending on the agenda items and where we are with everything, we're certainly welcome the county to come and present or give us some updates on their expenditure. So, any other comments, questions? Okay, thank you, Marcus. Appreciate your update. I don't see any other hands, and we are on our last item on the agenda, which is the upcoming meetings. And Ariana, if you want to go ahead and update everyone.
Yes, absolutely. So your next meeting is Wednesday, March 9th at 9:30 a.m. At this point, I'm not sure. I think it will still be virtual, but I will fill you in if there's any changes proposed for that. So we will see everybody back on March 9th.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for attending, for the members of the public to stick with us towards the end, and members of Italk, and all staff who have provided wonderful reports and progress updates to us. We will see you next meeting. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.